Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Forward Physio. Today, I'm lucky to be joined by Alec Blenis, who is a freak of an athlete, but he doesn't just sort of walk the walk. He's able to dive deep into training philosophies, debunk myths, promote really evidence-based, high-quality information, provide practical knowledge for people of seemingly any training level, while also just being a really, really good symbol for debunking a lot of the myths that are in fitness. When I say that, what I mean is, people say that you can't build a lot of muscle when you run a ton. Well, look at Alec. People say that you can't bend your spine doing a Jefferson curl with a lot of weight or it's going to damage your back. Again, look at Alec. You can't build muscle on a vegan diet. Look at Alec. But it's not just him as a symbol, but he's able to really explain these things eloquently. So I'm really, really excited to chat with you today, Alec. Thanks for joining me.
Dude, thank you so much. That was an awesome intro. Um, I'm not just contrarian to be contrarian. I'll put that out there as well. But I think one of the reasons that I like that intro you had for me, and doing some of the things that go against the grain, like the Jefferson curls and the hybrid training with like cardio and strength, is just I want to get people focused on the things about fitness that actually matter. And there's so much noise in the industry and a lot of people wanting to tell you what you can't do, shouldn't do, should be afraid of, etc. And I think we need a lot more of an approach orientation of like, no, these are the things that are good for you. Let's focus on what you actually need. And a lot of that other stuff, once you're deep into it, it just doesn't matter as much as you thought it did. So happy to be here to discuss some of that stuff today.
100%, man. And I feel like that's a big reason I wanted to have you on is because you're really good at zooming out and just explaining the bigger picture to people. And a lot of the time when I'm doing this podcast, the goal is to help practitioners, whether it's clinicians or trainers, be able to zoom out and look at the bigger picture and then explain that to the people that they're working with. So I'm looking forward to doing that, mostly with cardio training. And
Yeah.
selfishly, I had you on because I'm not great at explaining cardio to people. I feel like I grew up mostly being in the gym and lifting weights. So I'm excited to dive into like cardio training philosophy a little bit more.
Yeah, super looking forward to it. I mean, cardio is something I'm super passionate about, just personally, in terms of my athletic background and that kind of stuff. I also think it's a big miss in strength and conditioning. I joke that for a lot of people, S&C is just like sets of three and sets of 10, where it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
there's a real conditioning side that I think people are missing out on, especially in the education side. And if you're a physio, if you're a PT, a clinician, I think a big miss. Um, is kind of looking at the biological side. And we talked about this a little bit off camera before we started, but people get so focused on the biomechanics of injuries and that sort of thing and forget about things like tissue health and like how someone's triglycerides might be impacting their inflammatory response and those sorts of things. And those are all things that we can, positively influence really, really directly and really, really positively through cardiovascular training. So yeah, super passionate about it.
Yeah, man. We overlook the health of the person that we're working with way too often, which is crazy in healthcare. But we just have this tendency to zoom in on the painful body part that they're dealing with. And we're not thinking about like, hey, is this person like even getting enough steps a day? When's the last time
Right.
they went on a run or like actually elevated their heart rate? Could their system be healthier and in a better position to heal? But before we actually dive into sort of like these myths and training advice around cardio, can you give everyone a little bit of a background into your experience with your actual training? Like how much cardio do you do and how did you become to be like the actual athlete that you are? Because it's incredibly impressive.
Thank you. My athletic training for myself has varied a lot through the years and through the seasons. I started off just kind of bouncing around between different sports, doing a little bit of everything. Good at most things, but great at nothing, kind of thing, which is a theme I think that has continued to today. But Was a track and field athlete, got into cross country. So I have a strong cardio background from my youth. Really pushed the endurance side of things pretty seriously as a teenager and into my early 20s. Got into marathoning, ultra marathoning at a young age. I ran my first ultra marathon when I was 17, my first 50 miler, and basically became obsessed and was doing like a marathon or ultra every month, sometimes every couple of weeks for like a couple of years. So I think by the time I was 21 or 22, I'd done like 50 plus ultras and or marathon events. Um, and for obvious reasons, I got a little bit burnt out from all of that competition. Um, I had always been doing some form of strength training alongside that to support it. But I'd say in my early 20s, I kind of transitioned and got a lot more into the strength training side of things and kind of swung the other way. And year to year, season to season, I would kind of flip back and forth between pushing cardio a little bit more, pushing strength a little bit more, but they were both, omnipresent in my program throughout. And I would say over the last couple years, I've really been pushing the running side and the cardio side of things a lot harder again. Never gave it up, never stopped. I would say at my lowest point, I was still probably running or doing some sort of endurance training for 3 or 4 hours a week. Right now, I'm closer to 10 to 12 hours a week of total aerobic training. And then I'm still lifting 4 to 6 days a week on top of that. So training is a huge part of my life. I'm training more now than I probably ever have, even when I was a college athlete, teenager, all that kind of stuff. But very lucky that fitness is my life and my job. So in some ways, I feel like there's no excuse for me not to be as committed as I am to it.
Hmm. And in terms of just your goal right now, you're ramping up your running volume. Like, do you have a race that you're prepping for? Like, where are you at in terms of what you're chasing?
Yeah, so when I was really pushing the running a lot when I was young, I was into marathons. I ran the Boston Marathon. My PR at the time was 250. And when I kind of stopped running quite as much and got really into the strength training side of things, I gained a lot of weight, of muscle mass. And now I'm about 35 pounds heavier than I was as a teenager when I ran that 250. And as I started getting back into it, I kind of thought that maybe that PR was behind me and I'll see what I can do in this half of life or phase of life as more of a strength athlete or true hybrid athlete. And to my surprise, I actually set a new PR last year and then set another new PR this year. So I'm still getting faster. I'm faster now than I was when I was 18, despite being 35 pounds heavier. Um, and it's been a really fun journey. It's been cool to see. And I'm just trying to keep that going as long as I can. Because one day you're gonna set your last PR and you won't know it at the time.
Yeah.
But I want to be able to look back and be like, I gave it my all. I did the best that I could.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, if this isn't the best that you could do, I don't know what is, because it's crazy to see the volume that you do.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
How do you feel? Because people hear this type of stuff and they're like, "Oh, this guy's body must just be broken."
Um, I generally would say I'm very fortunate to have had a not completely injury-free career, but nothing too serious. I generally feel pretty good most of the time. It's not all sunshines and rainbows. Like there's things that happen, and usually you can probably relate to this. I feel like a lot of coaches and physios can relate to this. The most serious injuries I've had have all been from stupid, random things, like not even related to my sport. Um, I would say when I am pushing the volume or like really, going all in, you get tired, you get fatigued. There's days you don't want to do it. Um, Sometimes sleep quality isn't super great when training stress is like really, really, really high.
Mm.
But that kind of comes with the territory a little bit, I think. And like I said, for the most part, I've been super fortunate and feel really good most of the time compared to a lot of other people I talk to. So thanks, mom and dad, for some genetics
Yeah,
on that front too.
seriously. But also some good, smart programming, I'm sure, as well. Right? Like, it's possible to get to the level that you're doing and not just completely be in a state where you're running through immense amounts of pains. I'm sure there's pain and injuries that you're running through, which is cool, but nothing like, like a intense bone stress injury or something like that.
Yeah, and I think, health and performance and feeling good versus performance, I think they can diverge at the extremes, and sometimes we do see, some unhealthy behaviors in pursuit of athletic performance and that kind of thing. But I do think the overlap is bigger than most people give it credit for. I think by and large, like good performance-based training is longevity training. It is feel-good training. It is healthy training. 95% overlap, I would say. And for me, I'm not at a point where I want to sacrifice health or anything like that in pursuit of performance. So there's a few, edges and extremes I wouldn't be willing to go to, but
Yeah.
I think it overlaps for the most part. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So speaking of health and longevity and cardio, I've heard the argument before, and honestly, I used to prescribe to it that, like strength training is enough in terms of longevity and health, and that it gets your heart rate up and that it will improve your cardio to an extent that is enough for longevity purposes. And if you just walk and lift, like, you're probably fine. Would you agree with that? Or do you think for increasing someone's health span or lifespan that they should be doing some form of cardio specific exercise?
So there's two things I want to get out of the way first to dive into this conversation. And one is, I think a lot of it is subjective with like, what do you personally want to get out of life and what does longevity mean to you? Because for some people, if I could guarantee them, which I can't, but if I could guarantee them, hey, if you do X amount of cardio, you're going to live 3 more years. Some people would be like, heck yeah, I want to live 3 more years. Like, what's the plan? And
Yeah.
then other people would be like, nah, it's not worth it. I hate cardio so much. I'll
Right.
take the dip in life expectancy. You know what I mean? So I think there's a level of subjectivity to it in terms of like, what does health and longevity mean to you, and what trade-offs and sacrifices are you willing to make for your health. So I totally understand that, sometimes it's just not, maybe the juice isn't worth the squeeze, or you feel like you've reached a point that's good enough for your goals, and not everyone wants to like optimize and push the edges of health optimization, which is fine. The other thing I want to talk about before we jump into like some of the data and stuff on this is the difference between anecdote and like large scale, like cohorts and population data and that kind of thing. Because every time I have this conversation, there's always someone like in the audience or in my comments, it's like, well, I don't do any cardio, and I can still run a sub 6 minute mile if I had to, or my grandpa didn't do any cardio and he lived to be 90. Like, there's always these
And I bet
one-off
he smoked
anecdotes. I'm
too.
like, yeah, right. Exactly. There's always these sorts of things. So like when I'm talking about what the data says and my recommendations for cardio, it's based on, large cohort studies and that sort of thing, not like your grandpa or whatever. Um, but with all of that out of the way, I would say that the data on aerobic fitness and longevity, basically all cause mortality and aerobic fitness, it's some of the strongest data that we have in all of health research. I'd say the two things that we see in health and nutrition research that are the absolute strongest, that it's like crazy to me when people want to argue about it, is the importance of aerobic fitness and the importance of fiber. When people want to talk shit about cardio or fiber, I'm like, like we're living in different planets kind of thing. Because it is really important. Um, so to give an example of how important it is, there's an often cited research paper that looked at aerobic fitness status. They called it VO2 max, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. But they looked at aerobic fitness status versus all-cause mortality and comparing the fittest group, so the fittest quintile of performance, to the bottom quintile of performance. There was a five-fold difference, or basically a hazard ratio of 5.0. So 500% increased risk of all-cause mortality. I guess 400% increase, five times hazard
Yeah.
ratio, for all cause mortality. Which, when we look at um, like other lifestyle factors, to kind of put that 500 or five times hazard ratio in perspective, it's massive. I posted for a comparison a meta review on ultra processed food intake, and the same thing. This was quartile based, upper quartile versus lower quartile for ultra processed food consumption. The mortality increase was 4%. versus like for aerobic fitness, it was like 400%. So like the
Unbelievable.
difference is insane in terms of like the impact of aerobic fitness. Um, and some people point at that and they'll point for like little flaws, like maybe people with just better genetics, for example, live longer and have better fitness. So maybe it's just sort of like kind of healthy user bias or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, but I think we have a lot of, if we look at the totality of the data, we have some really good interventional trials too that point to the same relationship and have similar effect sizes. We also have some genetic studies that actually look at the genetic component of aerobic fitness. There was one that came out this year, 2025 paper that looked at the genetic underpinnings of VO2 max and found that that did not predict longevity at all,
Oh, wow.
which I think only strengthens the conclusion that training-based interventions for VO2 max or training-based interventions for aerobic fitness is going to be one of the most powerful things you can do if you want to live longer. To put it into perspective though, because it's easy to look at the strength of these numbers and want to go all in on cardio, but I think we have to look at like the dose response relationship and like how much does it take to get the majority of the benefit and that kind of thing too. um, and when you do that, I think it's really reassuring because while fitness is really great, really predictive of longevity, you don't have to be a professional athlete. You don't have to have like insane fitness levels to get the vast majority of the benefit. Um, so we see this both with the objectively measured fitness data. So looking at people's like VO2 max or treadmill performance, you get the majority of the benefit from being kind of high fitness, but you don't have to be elite. It's like very marginal gains at that point. We also see it with the step count literature. So when we look at people that get 5,000 versus 10,000 versus 15,000 steps, it's a really steep slope at the beginning and a
Mhm.
pretty early plateau. So like, yeah, you should probably get 8 to 10,000 steps, but what's the marginal benefit of 20? It's a lot less. And then we also see it if listeners are familiar with like the CDC physical activity guidelines, 150 to 300 minutes a week of moderate intensity activity or 75 to 150 minutes of vigorous activity, those the lower ends of those thresholds, so 75 minutes vigorous or 150 minutes of moderate activity, those were set based on getting 70 to 80% of the potential mortality risk reduction.
Oh, wow.
um, so that was basically the evidence-based inflection point for more is probably better, but beyond that, the gains are pretty marginal.
Yeah.
So whether we're looking at self-reported physical activity, objectively measured step count, objectively measured fitness, we see the same trends again and again and again, which is it doesn't take that much to get a ton of benefit. And then beyond that, it's still great. Knock yourself out if you want to do more, but we're definitely looking at marginal gains beyond a certain point. So basically, all of that is a very long way of saying that the physical activity guidelines that has really good research behind it, that's my starting point for recommendations for people of like just hit those physical activity guidelines and you're going to get the majority of the benefit. If we want to take it a step further, I do think looking at your fitness objectively is important, because comparing like some of the step count data and self-reported physical activity data to the actual fitness data,
Hmm.
the hazard ratios are a lot bigger with objectively measured fitness. So, for example, looking at high versus low step count or high versus low physical activity, we tend to see mortality reductions of about 25 to 50%, which is huge. It's still really, really impactful. When we look at high versus low fitness measured objectively, that's in the hundreds of percentages, like 300 to 400% reduction. So, in terms of putting that into an evidence based recommendation, I think physical activity and steps are great, but I think the details of what is in those minutes and how it's benefiting you and how it's improving your performance is even more important and often overlooked. So I do like people to have some sort of performance metric that they're chasing, whether that's trying to improve their 1 mile run time or their 2K row or a 20-minute bike test. Pick something that's meaningful to you and just try to get better at cardio. I think having some sort of performance driven metric is going to do more for your health than just trying to check the box for minutes, but they're both really important. I know that was like a really long, rambling answer digging into the physical activity and fitness, but did that sort of make sense?
100%. You actually beat me to some of the questions I was going to ask you. Like, I was going to ask if you were a politician and you had to make a recommendation for a lot of people in terms of what levels of activity should they be hitting, would it align with those CDC guidelines or not? And you sort of already answered that. I thought it was really interesting when you brought up that study that came out about having that genetic sort of marker for a higher VO2 max, but not necessarily training, and that not predicting mortality. But also that we do want to track things objectively, because that seems to be a little bit better than these self-reported measures. So what is it that we're looking for? Is it actually a high VO2 max that we're trying to obtain through training and not necessarily by having a genetic predisposition for it? What is it that we're actually trying to chase through these objective measures? And why do you think that has more of a positive effect on mortality than these self-reported ones?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think a lot of research still needs to be done to be able to answer this with a lot of certainty, because a mistake that I think people have made when interpreting some of this literature is they see studies talking about how VO2 max is the best predictor of longevity or mortality. And the reality is that that's not really a fair title or headline based off of those studies for a couple of reasons. One, most of the studies, especially the large scale studies, they aren't measuring VO2 max objectively. They're actually just doing a performance test, usually like a Bruce protocol, if people are familiar with that. What that is, basically put people on a treadmill, ramp up the speed and the incline, and see how far they make it. But there's no gas exchange. You're not measuring oxygen intake. It's not terribly different than like a Cooper run test or a mile run test. These are generally performance-based tests, not actual VO2 max assessments. So at least based on the headline paper that's made it to a lot of podcasts lately, where people talk about VO2 max, I think a more fair title would just be aerobic fitness performance rather than VO2 max. And I think that's important for a couple reasons, because in other studies that measure aerobic fitness differently, for example, submaximal cycling, there's a common protocol where they'll look at just how much does your heart rate increase going from like a low to moderate workload on a bike. And then they'll estimate your VO2 max or something from that, but it's submaximal. They're guessing at kind of what your maximum heart rate is in some of the calculations. So there's a lot of approximations built in. If we measure fitness that way, the same relationships and uh, the same strength of those relationships between fitness and mortality still show up. So whether we're looking at maximal exercise performance, objectively measured VO2 max, submaximal cycling performance, or even I've come across some papers now and they're using like basically AI kind of AI algorithms to look at people's resting metrics and estimate their fitness based off of those. So looking at people's like resting heart rate, blood pressure, BMI, all those sorts of things, and then computing what they expect the fitness to be. No matter how you slice it, we see almost the exact same correlation strengths with fitness and with longevity or mortality. So I think when people put VO2 max up on a pedestal of like VO2 max is the best predictor, I'm like, is it though? Like, no matter how we measure fitness, we're seeing the same trend. So as of yet, I don't think there is any independent marker that stands out as like, yes, this is what we want. It's like, is it maximum performance? Is it, what is the thing? I think we can poke at it and guess mechanistically. I don't think we have any good outcome data or studies that we can definitively say this is the best type of exercise or this is the best test to predict mortality. As far as I'm concerned right now, just generalized aerobic fitness, as vague as that is, I think that's as accurate of a statement as we can make. But in terms of looking at the genetic underpinnings of VO2 max, so things like just how large of a heart were you born with? Like if you were born with some massive heart, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to live any longer. And I think probably the reasons behind that, like what are the differences between genetically high VO2 max and training induced VO2 max? It's going to have to do with like cell turnover, autophagy, um, capillarization, blood flow, like all those sorts of things, as opposed to like your, limb length, your anthropometry, like those sorts of things, the size of your heart and lungs, like those sorts of things are useful for performance and for VO2 max, but there's no reason that I can think of why that would prevent, you know, uh, plaque buildup and that sort of thing, as
Right.
opposed to the actual, you know, uh, cellular and metabolic stress associated with exercise. Um, when we look at the difference in adaptations to high intensity exercise versus low intensity exercise, and think about how that's going to translate to VO2 max and some of these other things. Um, and then we compare that against how physical activity versus just objective fitness also seems to be an independent predictor of health. I think that it's foolhardy to think that there's ever going to be one test or one thing. I think some of the adaptations you get with high intensity exercise are going to be independently protective. So, for example, increased cardiac contractility, increased like wall thickness. I think some of those adaptations are going to be protective. I think some of the increases in mitochondrial volume and capillarization that you see with low intensity, more sustained exercise and physical activity, I think those are going to be protective. So I think as much as the media wants to be able to like pit exercise forms against one another and be like interval training better than steady state,
Yeah.
it's like it doesn't work that way. I don't know why people want these sort of battles and like, fights between different training camps and train this way, not that way. This style works better than that. Um, I think by and large, especially for most people who are not going to be training at a super, super high level, they're not training 10 plus hours a week like I am. I think just trying to get a little bit of the benefit from different exercise categories is probably your best bet based on the research I've seen so far. So do a little bit of strength training, do a little bit of high intensity training, do something that gets you more total volume and just physical activity time, breaks up sedentary time. I think if we can hit all of those buckets, for the general population, I think that's our best bet versus trying to say this is the best way to train. Um, a little bit of everything is great. On the flip side, if you are someone that trains a ton, um, I think a lot of the nuances here stop mattering just from sheer volume and time committed. So, like if you're a sprinter, for example, you're probably not doing a lot of steady state work. And outside of training, you might be fairly sedentary, just because you're focused on recovery.
Yeah.
But if you're at the track for an hour and a half a day and going to the gym, like you're going to be fine. I'm not going to argue with you about why you need to do zone two. Like you don't, you're fine. So I think some of that gets lost in translation too, of like what sort of population are we talking to? Is
Right.
this an athletic population? Is it general population? And our recommendations and the things that we say need to look a little bit different. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Does that all make sense?
For sure. The using VO2 as a marker for longevity, it sort of reminds me of like using grip strength or the amount
Yeah.
of push-ups that someone can.
Yeah.
It's probably not that like we need to be maximizing our grip strength or our push-ups in order to live longer. And it sounds like it's sort of similar with VO2 max. It's not like we need to be solely focused on maximizing that.
It's the old good arts law, or like the more weight you put on something, as a measure, the less useful it becomes. And I would even argue, like in the case with grip strength, if you make if you put grip strength up on this pedestal and now people are training their grip, and you're comparing, one person who has, 100-pound grip strength because they've trained it versus someone else who's just really active and that's why they have 100-pound grip strength. That latter person is probably better off,
Right.
if they are able to hit the same standard just from general activity. And I think we see the same thing with VO2 max, where if I'm comparing two people and they both have a VO2 max of 40, and one of them has a VO2 max of 40 because they did an 8-week VO2 max protocol, versus the other person has a VO2 max of 40 because they're just recreationally active, they walk a lot, they exercise, they hit the gym, they do all the things. I think that's probably reflective of a healthier person than the person who's like, nah, I'm good. I did this like very specific protocol to maximize my performance on this one test that you told me was important. Um, I think it stops being quite as useful in that case. So that's one of the things that upsets me the most about how VO2 max has been picked up by the mainstream media and some like general population health podcasts is now we have people talking about like VO2 max is so important. Here's this VO2 max protocol. It's like, is that, do we really want to be treating people like they're participants in an 8-week VO2 max study versus like setting them up for long-term sustainable fitness? Especially given, like we talked about already, it's not so much that VO2 max is the best predictor of longevity, it's just general fitness. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And it sounds like a better way of having like high VO2 max or whatever these things is from more of a generalist perspective. And the reason being is because by doing different sort of exercise modalities, you're more likely to pick up a wider range of healthy adaptations that you would get, because you get different adaptations from maybe a lower intensity form of cardio versus a higher intensity.
I think so. And I think there's a lot of other factors, kind of confounding variables in some of the VO2 max research that people aren't talking about, because maybe it would weaken the argument a little bit. But for example, this big study on VO2 max and longevity, um, that a lot of people talk about. It had hundreds of thousands of participants, all people who had been referred for exercise, like stress exercise testing. So that's already kind of a biased population sample a little bit. Um, but most of like the most impactful data, like where we really see these big differences, is like from low fitness to like medium and high fitness. It's
Mm.
really these low fitness people that are big outliers, like really dragging down the all-cause mortality numbers or longevity numbers. But when you look at what these tests actually look like, especially for some of the elderly populations being tested, it's measuring how steep of an incline they can walk on before the test administrator determines there's some sort of risk and decides like we're going to shut this down. And so if you can imagine an elderly person being referred for exercise testing in a hospital setting, trying to walk really fast in a treadmill, they might be someone who is not even limited by their aerobic capacity. It might be their balance and their strength and all those sorts of things that prevent them from being able to walk uphill on a treadmill
Yeah.
before someone's like, nah, cut the test. Like this is a bad, this is a
Right.
bad idea. So it does make you wonder, like, how much are we really testing aerobic fitness in some of these people versus how much is like general fitness and general preparedness and functional status popping up, especially where we see some of these really, really strong numbers and big hazard ratios. Because when we get into the higher fitness levels where we're comparing like, okay, did you last 3 minutes versus 2 minutes while running 5 miles an hour on 16% incline, like then we're talking about like very, very small differences in hazard ratio. So I think there's a lot of limitations with the research there where things like muscle strength and the overall functional status are actually skewing the numbers a little bit versus pure cardio.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think that's definitely an important thing to consider as well.
Okay. So let's talk about these people that are at the lower end of the spectrum in terms of their fitness. And obviously, we always need to individualize our recommendations to the actual person in front of us. We're not going to give every single person the same running program, especially if, they're dealing with a knee injury.
Yeah,
They've never run before. They hate running. They'd rather cycle, etc. But my question is, in general, what sort of recommendations would you make to the average sedentary individual when it comes to their cardio, and they're coming to you and they're saying, Alec, I want to be healthier. I want to improve my lifespan, extend it a little bit. How much cardio should I be doing? And what form of cardio should I be doing?
sure. Um, I guess I love caveats and people probably hate me for caveats, but I love
This is the
throwing them.
podcast of
I
caveats. Don't worry.
I love throwing them out. So like if we go back to the CDC physical activity guidelines, a lot of people are familiar with those, but few people have looked at like actually clicked and read the whole like 50 plus page document diving into all the data and that kind of thing. And if you do, one of my favorite parts of it is the subgroup analysis where they look at people with like pre-existing conditions, or heart failure, those sorts of things. And basically the less fit and the less healthy you are, and if you have pre-existing complications, especially if you have heart disease already, it takes more exercise to get the same mortality risk reduction compared to the overall population.
Oh wow.
Um, and that kind of sucks, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Um, but I think, and this is obvious when you say it out loud, but maintaining fitness and maintaining health is a lot easier than getting fit and getting healthy. So if you're someone who is relatively young, relatively healthy, you're still in a position where you're like, not worried about your cardio health, you just want to make sure you're on track, the recommendations are probably going to be a little bit easier to be able to maintain what you currently have.
Hmm.
But if you're someone who's been neglecting your cardio fitness for 30 years and now you're sedentary and you're getting winded going up a flight of stairs and you're like, shit, what do I do? You will probably have to work a little bit harder. Um, and you're probably going to look at some people who are like, no, I don't do cardio. I just hit the gym and get my 10,000 steps and I'm good. And you might be wondering, how come I can't do the same thing? And unfortunately, it just takes a little bit more work to dig yourself out of a hole than to, stay above the ground. Um, so with that in mind, in terms of general recommendations, hitting those physical activity guidelines is your number one priority for sure. If you're doing that, you have the majority of the benefits covered. Um, Adherence is extremely important. Oftentimes, high intensity exercise prevails in some studies just because people were more likely to stick to it. They didn't get as bored, they were able to gamify it, have a little bit of fun.
Hmm.
But that can swing both ways. Like find the cardio that is enjoyable to you. If the thought of doing intervals is a big turnoff and you're like, I just am not going to do that. If you would rather go out for an hour and do a brisk walk or a jog or something like that for a longer period of time, that's totally fine. I don't want anyone to feel like they're to have FOMO and like think they're missing out on all these crazy benefits to exercise by just training a certain way.
Hmm.
Because you can definitely, if you're doing enough, you don't have to worry about the details that much. Sort of like I make the analogy to protein. If you're barely eating enough protein, your protein quality matters a lot. Like you want to be getting it from complete protein sources and that sort of thing, and maybe thinking about timing and blah blah blah. But if you just eat more protein, you just don't have to worry about that stuff so much.
Yeah.
And I think cardio is a lot of the same thing. If you're someone who's trying to think, what is the least amount of cardio I can possibly do to get the benefit, then I would probably be a little bit more specific of like, I want you to get some intervals in. I want you to at least get your heart rate up this
Hmm.
much. I would say those sorts of things matter more. But if you just hit the higher end of the guideline, for example, then it's kind of becomes a matter of just do it. Like just do whatever you want. It's going to be fine.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I'd say if you're on the lower end of the guideline, get some intensity behind it. Definitely put some structure into some like really challenging high intensity sessions if you're trying to get a lot of bang for your buck in a very minimal amount of time. If you're able to hit the upper end of the guidelines, just have fun and find a way to stay consistent with it. And those details are going to be less important for you.
Awesome. And you're okay if, let's say, people are meeting the higher ends of the guideline, if they get that in one bout of exercise a week versus if it's spread across, 7 different runs or cycles.
Um, I mean, to hit the upper end of the guideline in one bout is going to be a pretty big workout
Yeah.
for most people. Um, but to be fair, I saw this paper a couple of years ago, so I'm going to be fuzzy on the details. But I saw a paper that looked at kind of weekend warrior style exercise versus more consistent dosing. And it was actually kind of a surprising conclusion that was like, if you actually match for total work done, even the weekend warrior approach was really, really effective.
Hmm.
Um, it may not be as fun. Maybe there's slightly higher chance of, acute musculoskeletal injury with like a big bout of exercise. But from like a metabolic perspective, it really does seem like just weekly accumulation is the name of the game. I think in terms of adherence and logistics and all those other variables, I think distributing, thinking about frequency, all that stuff, I think matters a lot. But from a pure metabolic perspective, weekly accumulation is huge. This comes up a lot too, even with higher level athletes who are like, should I do one 10-mile run in a day or two 5-mile runs, like singles versus doubles and that kind of thing. And there's been a number of studies that look at that, and it's like every time it's like it just doesn't seem to matter all that much from a pure metabolic perspective. It's really all those secondary factors. So find a way that feels good to you that you can stick with, be consistent, and just get the work done across the week. And that's 90% of it for sure.
It's great. It means that we could actually individualize things more because we have so many options, right? Which is,
Yeah,
I
for
love that.
sure.
That's awesome. That's the approach to rehab a lot of the time too. I don't think, at least I'm not, and I know many of the people listening to this are not, if they're clinicians, believers that there's one best approach to rehab a lot of the time. Like a lot of the time we have many options, and the best one is usually the one that the person in front of you is telling you is best for them,
Yeah.
because they're going to adhere to it and they're going to enjoy it and they're going to stick to it. So
It's a cliche for sure of
yeah,
like
it is.
just the consistency thing, but it's seriously so true. Like as cliche as it is, I don't think we can emphasize it enough.
Yeah, I agree. I've been, because of you, actually, I haven't told you this, but I've been running more consistently now, trying
Nice.
to like really adopt it. I'm sure you get that pretty often just because of
Yeah.
you're promoting this stuff. But
I will say in the running side, I think especially with like high impact stuff, I like encouraging a little higher frequency versus like trying to do too much in one go.
yeah,
Kind of back to like the musculoskeletal side and like bone stress side. Um, but especially with like some low impact cardio stuff, you can kind of chunk it out a little bit uh, more, and it'd be pretty tolerable. But yeah, if you're listening and you're like, I want to start running, don't just go run 10 miles in
yeah.
one go on your first time.
Yeah, please, please, please don't do that. Like a lot of people get into a boom bust cycle with running. Like they run way too much, they get injured, and then they take their time off. They get back to running, they get injured again because they didn't take any, like they didn't try and build up slowly, and
Yeah.
then oftentimes the people that were telling them their whole life running's bad for your knees or running's bad for your hips, then they start to believe it because they have such a negative experience, but it's mostly because they just didn't dose things properly.
Yeah, I see that a lot of times when I have runners that are trying to get back into something after an injury. Uh, they have these like distances in their head of like a run has to be at least this far for it to even be worth doing kind of thing. Like a lot of runners just won't even run unless it's 3 miles. It's like that's either 0 or 3 miles is like a minimum run or something. And I find a lot of people they want to like rest and then they are feeling better and they want to go try to run 3 miles again. And then they'll like rest a couple more days and try to run 3 miles again. So I found just encouraging people to like, what's an amount that you think you could handle as low as it is? Like, let's go run just a quarter mile a day and just see how that feels after the week. And I found that works really, really well for people because it keeps them from overdoing it
Yeah.
versus like wanting to go for a 3 or 4 mile run at a time. Uh, so that's kind of my like idiot proof return to run strategy of like let's just micro dose it and go from there. I don't know if you have a similar approach or how you navigate it, but I found that to be kind of helpful.
For sure. I definitely take that approach of like, let's go smaller doses a little bit more frequently. Because people, I think they also enjoy that because they get to do the thing a little bit more often. And especially if they're coming back from an injury and they are a diehard runner and they love it. Like you're sort of telling them, hey, it's safe to do this every day or almost every day. We just have to make sure that you're not doing too much in one bout. And I think people enjoy that.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen a lot of really good response to it. And it gives them the structure. I think a lot of runners and athletes, they have this like routine of like they train every day and like being able to give them like, yeah, we can stick to the routine. Just it's just gonna be a lot less, you know?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Can we talk a little bit about zone two cardio? Because I'm lost. It
Yeah.
there's so much weird information about it. So could you explain to everyone what it is and whether it's like this magic pill that everybody says it is?
Sure. So when I think of zone two, I kind of think about it in two different ways or two different definitions. I, on the one hand, I think of like physiological zone two. So in terms of actual blood lactate and heart rate and etc. Like how can we really define zone two? Um, and so when we're talking about kind of physiological zone two, we're talking about a specific intensity range that like is objective. And then on the other hand, zone two is also just kind of a synonym for just easy training,
Mm.
which I think can be a little bit more subjective and vague. And so there's kind of what I would look at like zone two as it's defined in the research and that sort of thing. And then also a more like kind of pragmatic, like what should easy training look like for you? And sometimes they're the same. And sometimes what I might recommend for someone in terms of how they approach kind of low intensity, steady state training, it may or may not fit the kind of scientific or physiological definition of zone two. And I think sometimes inconsistency in definitions and how people define zones can lead to some confusion. And it's tricky because even with training zones, like some research uses a 3 zone model, and so they have zone one, zone two, and zone three. Um, I think it's interesting because it's not very common that athletes use the 3 zone model, but it's
Mm.
pretty common in the literature. Most runners use a 5 zone model. Um, in cycling, a 7 zone model is common. And so there's all these different like zone models and systems, and people define threshold and stuff differently. And so I think a lot of stuff gets lost in translation, just with like what zone are you referring to and what paper are you reading and et cetera. Uh, so from a scientific or kind of physiological perspective, zone two is basically going to be the training intensity that you can sustain without any sort of like onset of blood lactate accumulation. It's generally going to be at and below what we call the first ventilatory threshold. So if you were to plot someone's respiratory frequency versus exercise intensity, you're going to see like a very kind of slow trickle increase up to the first ventilatory threshold, what we call VT1. At that point, for someone to exercise harder, their respiratory rate is going to shoot up just a little bit more. There's going to be an inflection point. It's going to kind of level off again, and then there's going to be a second inflection point, which is the second ventilatory threshold, or often referred to as the lactate threshold. Um, People get all fancy with blood lactate, with heart rate, with gas exchange tests where they measure fat versus carbohydrate oxidation. Um, but surprisingly, just respiratory frequency tends to align really, really well with a lot of the more sophisticated measures that we have out there, like blood lactate and um, respiratory quotient with gas exchange tests. So for it sounds kind of like a less scientific way to do it, but if you just do the talk test, which is basically how hard can you push while still being able to maintain a conversation without like sounding strained, that basically is VT1, or the first ventilatory threshold,
So
or
fun.
the limit of your zone two. People don't often like that. They're like, what heart rate should it be, or whatever. They want something more like scientific seeming.
Hmm.
Um, but just the talk test or respiratory frequency kind of inflection point tends to line up like spot on with some of these more sophisticated measures. So from a scientific or physiological perspective, that's how I would describe it: is what is the fastest pace, or roughly the fastest pace you can sustain while carrying on a conversation and not sounding super winded. Uh, More practically speaking, in terms of like what is the purpose of zone two, um, in my opinion, it's really just a means to accumulate volume and to be able to still um, do meaningful training in between harder exercise. Um, so if you're someone who is not training that much, you're only training 2-3 hours a week in terms of cardio, I would encourage that person to just push maybe a little bit harder, maybe past the physiological zone two or ventilatory threshold, just to try to get more work done in their week, as long as they're feeling good.
Mm.
And you can do that confidently and not feel like you're missing out on anything, because the research shows that there's not any specific magical benefit to zone 2 as opposed to higher intensity exercise, other than the recoverability of it.
Mm.
So zone 2 is really a way to prevent yourself from getting too tired and too fatigued. We tend to see more muscle damage and inflammation and these sorts of things from higher intensity exercise. But as long as you're managing your recovery overall and you get to the end of the week and you're like, I feel good, I can do that again,
Mhm.
whether your heart rate was 140 or 150 is not that important. On the other hand, if you get to the end of your week and you're like, man, I'm run down, I'm tired, my sleep is not great, try backing off the intensity a little bit and see if you feel better. And ultimately, that's kind of my gold standard test for zone 2. It's not a blood lactate reading or a heart rate measure, it's your actual recovery. So if your recovery sucks, train less hard and see how it goes. And if you're feeling good, you can push a little bit harder and see how it goes. And you can kind of dial in your zone 2 intensity with more of a trial and error approach. It's also a means to accumulate training between harder bouts. So if you do a really hard workout, if you do a really, really tough high intensity interval session, you're going to be tired the next day. You're going to be maybe a little bit sore, and you're not in a position where you can train hard again. If you try to, you wouldn't be able to hit the numbers you need to hit to progress. But that doesn't mean you just have to sit on the couch and do nothing. So zone 2 is that intensity that you can still do even when you're recovering from other training, without digging yourself even deeper into a hole.
Cool.
Um, so if you push that work too hard, and this is a common mistake for a lot of intermediate level athletes, I would say, is they do a really hard workout and then they should do like a zone 2 session the next day. But instead, they push those a little bit too hard and they just dig themselves deeper into that recovery hole. And then it's time to train hard again the day after that, and they're still too tired.
Mm.
Or it's like if you had been more, conservative and backed off and done more of like a true physiological zone 2 below that first ventilatory threshold, you probably would have recovered better between those high intensity days. But you got greedy, you did too much, you pushed too hard on the easy day, and now you're not going to be able to push hard enough on the hard day. So that's where the saying, keep your easy days easy and your hard days hard, comes from.
Mm.
We want this kind of polarization between work hard when it's time to work hard and then train easy enough that you actually recover. But I think that sometimes people take that idea too far, especially for beginners, and they're too scared of intensity. When a lot of people that get really freaked out about this stuff and they worry about their cortisol response to moderate intensity training, it's like you're not training that hard in the first
Yeah.
place. You probably don't need to fret about it that much. But the deeper you go and the more fit you get, the more training you do, I think the more important it is to see that kind of separation and polarization. But there's no one size fits all approach of like, this is how everyone in the planet should do zone 2, because everyone's goals are different, everyone's training volumes are different, everyone's recovery is different. So to me, it's really just a load management tool of like, if we're seeing compromised recovery, if we need to train more between harder bouts, let's talk about zone 2. If we're just trying to get you to do more, let's just do more. Um, so yeah, no one size fits all. I think it's really commonly misunderstood because people look at the training practices of elite athletes and
Mm.
try to copy them when you're training like 10% as much as they are. So there's, you got to match your content to the audience.
Yeah.
And yeah, I could ramble on that all day, but
Well, I have a tough question for you, and
yeah,
well, it may be a bit too tough. We'll see how much there's rambling after that. But I'm curious, if you have someone, let's say their goal is just to maximize their longevity and their health, and they're strictly doing zone 2 cardio, they are meeting those CDC guidelines, and they're not really improving their performance. So they're pretty much doing like the same pace each time, not really like trying to improve their time too much. Would you tell that person that maybe they'd benefit a little bit more from pushing the intensity on some runs, or do you think they're doing realistically enough? And I know caveat is that like
yeah,
everyone's goals are a little bit different in terms of like how much juice they want to squeeze out of their cardio and how much that will benefit their mortality. But in
yeah.
theory, is that person doing enough?
Um, yeah, it gets tricky with the kind of subjectivity component of it. I would say this is where like a personalized approach that actually looks at all of someone's kind of risk factors together can be helpful.
Yeah.
Because if you're someone who feels like you're doing enough, but objectively your blood work is shit, your body composition position is shit, and like everything else objectively is saying you have room to improve, then maybe we utilize your exercise program as a means to move those things in the right direction.
Mm.
Um, so I think we have to look at the big picture and think about it kind of holistically.
Yeah.
So if you're someone who's like exclusively doing zone two for the 150 to 300 minutes a week, but you still have high blood pressure, for example, it's like maybe we should see and talk to your doctor and medicate if you need to medicate, but maybe see if you are someone who responds well to higher intensity, because we do tend to see in the research that high intensity interval training has some of the best biggest effect sizes for blood pressure reduction. So try it out and see and work with your doctor on that kind of stuff. But we have to look at the bigger picture and not be like, well, you're checking the box, you're fine. Like, I think we got to look at all of those sorts of things. If you're like generally in the clear on that stuff, if your blood work looks good, if you have healthy blood pressure, you're happy with your body composition, and you're just doing your 2 to 3 hours of zone two work per week and you're feeling good, I don't see a reason to tell that person, hey, you're not doing enough. But if there's markers that indicate, hey, there's room for improvement, I'm going to say, here's how exercise might be able to support those goals.
Awesome. Great answer. I'm conscious of your time, Alec. I've already taken about an hour of it. Do you need
Oh,
a head up? You're good? Okay.
yeah, we're good.
Uh, Outside of cardio, I think you're an amazing proponent for anti-fragile training, movement optimism. Someone who isn't a physio preaching these things, but someone who actually walks the walk and shows everybody that these sorts of incredible feats that we could do physically are possible and not automatically causative of an injury. And I think it's really, really awesome. And I appreciate all that content and evidence of the actual stuff that you put your body through. I appreciate you putting all that out there. You've been on record before saying like sometimes you run on trashed legs, you
Yeah.
know, like sometimes like you train and you don't feel great. And there's a lot of advice out there that I think goes against that. We're constantly telling people that they should feel really, really good when they're training and that they should always listen to their body. And I know there's nuance here, but I'd like to have you sort of explain that nuance. Can you just explain your thought process on this idea of anti-fragile training?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of inconsistency, inconsistent logic with a lot of advice from physios and trainers as it relates to um, pain and listening to your body and those sorts of things. And I know you chatted with, I think Ben Cormack. I think he might have been the first person I heard say this, um, of how weird it is that physios will be the first to like do some sort of manual therapy technique that hurts, like dry needling or like a psoas release. I'm sure you've had one of those where it's like it's just brutal,
Yeah.
or like someone digging into your subscap. It hurts like so bad. And you'll have like a massage therapist, a physio, be like, all right, this isn't gonna feel very good, but like somehow that's beneficial. But then when it comes to exercise, they're like, oh no, it hurts, let's stop. And it's like just this mismatch of logic of like, how come that pain is okay and this pain is not okay? That's never made a whole lot of sense to me. Um, and in other areas, like, with diet, for example, if you're like, well, listen to your body, it's like, well, I'm hungry, but I'm trying to lose weight. Should I eat or should I ignore? Like, we're not always listening to our body to, work towards a goal. So with exercise, sometimes there's going to be pain that sometimes that's okay. Just like manual therapy pain might be okay to a degree. And there's going to be times when your body says, let's stop, let's stay on the couch, let's not exercise today. And you just have to do the thing anyway, because that's going to be moving you in pursuit of your goal. So I think we need a more robust system for knowing what to do and uh, how to know like when is progressing this exercise and doing more safe and okay and beneficial, and when is it not. And I think we have to look more closely at like what are the actual results and outcomes and stuff you're getting versus just how you feel, because our feelings are so fleeting, can change in an instant.
Mm.
There's times when I don't feel like exercising or something hurts, and I start, and 2 minutes later everything's great. And I think it would be silly to make a decision based on this feeling that might only last for a couple of minutes. Um,
Yeah.
so not to say that we should just completely ignore the body and how you feel, but it's just one data point of many. It's just one of many things to consider in terms of how you're progressing a program and things that you're paying attention to. Um, and I think it's just become such a it's there's such a hyper focus on pain um over like function or subjective well-being and stuff in the physio world in terms of how we evaluate like the effectiveness of a program. I've seen physios talk about they'll like look at an exercise intervention, for example, and they'll be like, well, this wasn't any more effective for pain than that, so it doesn't work. It's like, well, why are we using pain as the only measure for effectiveness of a treatment?
Hmm.
Why aren't we looking at function or self-efficacy and people's confidence and things like that too? Because to me, if I got you through a 12-week exercise program and your pain was a 5 at the beginning and a 5 at the end, but now you're twice as strong, twice as confident, and your life has grown twice as big around that pain, to me, that's a huge success.
Yeah, it didn't
But
work. Like,
but it didn't work because the effect size for pain was too small or whatever. And I think that's kind of a tragedy of how like studies are performed in the physio world. And I think it contributes to the narrative that pain is an emergency and pain is this really, really important thing. Um, just the way that we talk about it, people come into a clinic, they come to the gym wanting to get out of pain. And I think part of that is natural because pain sucks, but part of that is this narrative that we've created of like pain means danger, pain means damage, etc. And I think it's on us as physios, as coaches and personal trainers to shift that narrative and be like, yeah, pain is something, but it's not everything. And we can grow your life around it, we can improve your function around it, we can improve your confidence around it, and that's not the only thing that matters. So in terms of like my approach to training and some of the like seemingly dangerous exercises I do and that sort of thing. I just want to show people that a lot of things that you've been taught about pain and injury um, just aren't the most important things in the world all of the time, and that like your confidence and your function and your ability to do things in spite of how your body might feel at any given time, those things are just as, if not more important.
yeah, it's beautifully said. And I love what you said about like what I guess Ben originally said this about the manual therapy versus the exercise. And we do focus on pain intensity a lot. And I know you know this, but sometimes pain intensity could be so high that it doesn't really matter what you believe about it. It could just really be debilitating. Like when
Yeah,
someone's suffering from really acute sciatica and they're at a 10 out of 10 pain, that just sucks. But
yeah,
a lot of the time, a lot of our suffering isn't solely because of pain intensity. It could also be because of how we think about it and how we interpret it. And someone pressing into you really hard and telling you that it's okay and you believe it, you suddenly are able to accept a lot of that discomfort. So it's also about knowing the context that you're in and the severity of your issue. And if it's not that severe and you do that exercise program that you said, where maybe the pain intensity didn't change, but your strength doubles, your flexibility improves, your blood pressure improves, and all these sorts of things, I think a really important component of that as a practitioner should be showing someone that maybe the pain level didn't change, but all these things improved. So maybe we could change how we're actually interpreting the pain and what it means in that context. And we could say it isn't really the end of the world because we could improve all of these things. And while the pain intensity didn't change in that context, maybe the suffering can because their self-efficacy is now better or their confidence is improved. So
yeah.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I think it's a shame that I think, there's obviously a lot of overlap with like personal training and strength coaches and stuff and what physical therapists do, but I think there's this idea that like personal training and coaching and like working with a trainer is what you do when you're healthy and pain free.
Yeah.
And then when you have pain, you go to a physical therapist for them to get your pain away. Um, Versus like to me, a physical therapist is maybe they do get your pain to go away, but oftentimes it's just like a really specialized kind of guide to help you train through that experience and build confidence and know what's okay and what's not okay and stuff in spite of what's going on versus like your job is to make them pain free again. Um, I don't like that we send people to PT with that expectation because that's just not always how it goes.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And I personally see myself more as that guide. And I don't know if it's necessarily a bad thing to have physios out there that are more, I guess, pain relief based physios, as long as they understand the context in which they're working and the patient does. Like
Yeah.
if I'm working with someone and I'm trying to like guide them back to exercising and, you know, like rebuilding their life and they have debilitating pain, maybe like I'm not the best with pain reduction techniques like manual therapy and all that. I mean, we could obviously get into the fact that like Tylenol, hot baths, and a million other things can be analgesic, but let's say they do really want human contact and they want to work with someone who can relieve their pain. I don't know if there's necessarily anything wrong with that as long as you understand what you're getting from that. But personally, that's not the type of physio that I always want to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's inherently wrong. It's just the narrative and the explanation behind a lot of that stuff. I always get frustrated when someone comes back from manual therapy or massage and they're like, yeah, they said I need, 12 more sessions to break up this scar tissue or whatever. It's like, that's the kind of stuff that just drives me nuts and makes me hate massage and manual therapy and that whole world. But I know that there's also nothing wrong with just like feel good treatment and stress relief. And like if it feels good to you and you have the money to spend on it, knock yourself out. I wish there was more honesty and transparency about what's actually going on with some of that stuff.
Yeah, it's usually the narratives that are the issue. And I know we keep bringing them up, but Ben today was saying how, like, to be fair, a lot of these narratives exist when you give someone like a really, really simple, or in some cases, overly complex exercise, and you're giving them a very complicated biomechanical explanation for why it
Yes.
relieves their pain. You know, like that could also apply for exercise. But anyway, it's the point being is that it's mostly about the narratives, right? And not the actual treatment.
Yeah. And I wish more people would say, I don't know, of like, this will probably make you feel better. I'm not 100% why, not 100% sure why it works,
Right.
but if it does, that's good. That's good enough too. Um, I think just having a little bit more of an exploratory attitude of like, here's some of the things I've seen work and make people feel better in the short term. We can give some of them a try. Just like more openness and communication about uncertainty and that kind of thing. Like I've had people, that I've used like isometrics on. Like, hey, some people do isos and it feels great for them. Some people it does absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
And let's give it a shot, see what you think. If it feels good, we'll keep doing it. Um, and I just wish more people would just take a like let's just try it out kind of thing
Yeah.
approach to it.
Yeah. And I think that is pretty clear with the approach that you took with explaining the benefit of cardio for longevity as well. Like, not really sure exactly what needs to change, but hey, let's just do some cardio because we
Yeah,
know that's
we know cardio is
how.
good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Alec, is there any final thoughts that you have before we wrap up?
Um, no, just go get some cardio in.
Yeah.
um,
You can't
if you
only
need
strength train, right?
can't only strength train. It's all good. It's not, we're not putting strength versus cardio. We're not in some sort of competition. All fitness is good fitness. I think do a little bit of everything. Um, Especially if you're not doing that much overall, a little bit of everything.
Mm.
Most of the arguments I get into with people are like people that, are in the gym like for 10 hours a week. I'm like, yeah, you're probably fine. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? But yeah, I think most general population people are like let's do a little bit of everything. Let's strength train. Let's do some cardio. Let's get really out of breath sometimes. Let's try to uh, do the minimum effective dose across a lot of different things. And so yeah, if there's something out there that you're not doing, Try to at least do a little bit. A little bit is infinitely better than none. That uh, the slope of that curve, the benefit curve is really steep at the beginning when you start doing something. So at least try to make sure you don't have anything in your program that's a total miss. At least do a little bit, and it's going to make a big difference.
Awesome. Cool. Where can people learn more from you and connect with you?
Best place to find me is on Instagram. My handle is just my full name at Alec Blenis. That's the best place. I have a YouTube channel as well. You can check me out there for some longer form content. I do a lot of like training collaborations and interviews and stuff there. But yeah, follow me on Instagram if you need a program, cardio, strength. I got those. Coaching, got that. If you just need a one-off consult, you want to talk about your cardio program, I do consults as well.
Awesome. Alec, thank you so much. I learned a ton, and I'm sure a lot of other people did as well. Haven't had anyone to talk about cardio yet on the podcast, and it was really, really needed. So thank you for stepping in.
Thank you. No, it was great.